Welcome to Off the Wire, the podcast that helps you curb cybersecurity risk and tackle technology challenges. We are Anthony and Tanner, two IT executives leading medium sized companies with a combined 35 years of experience in the IT and cybersecurity fields. I think we got a great episode for everyone tonight, Anthony. We had an idea a while back to talk about password managers, something we're both kind of going through and kind of what we saw as the benefits of them. So we titled this episode One Password to Rule Them All: The Case for Password Managers in the Enterprise. And that's what we're going to explore as part of this episode. Anthony, we both talked about how we're going through this right now. And in your mind, why did you go through or start this journey? Like, why did you see the need for having a password manager in your environment?
I don't know how many times where we ran into the case where we didn't have like a root password for some system and had to rebuild. I mean, there's been times where we've had to rebuild stuff where we didn't have the password. So we do end user training and we're saying, don't reuse your passwords. Don't reuse your passwords. And I was talking to an executive in our organization and they were explaining, like, "Well, you're telling me to do this, but it's impossible. Do you know how many logins I have?" And I was like, "Well, you need to do a password manager." And he's like, that person was like, "Well, you need to provide a password manager." And I was like, "Oh," "You're right. You're completely right." And so honestly, that conversation was this year. And this is one of those projects that's taken a little bit longer, not because it's difficult, just trying to get around all the other projects, but we're hoping to have it rolled out to, we're going to roll out to any end user that wants to use it. We're not going to force it on people, but those that want to do it, we're going to budget for everybody, and whoever wants to use it, we'll do that. But I know what you've mentioned in the past, Tanner, that if you don't provide a solution for folks, that they're just going to go get their own product.
That's definitely something I've seen kind of happen over and over. Typically, or kind of the reverse of that is you find a product someone's using and you're like, why did they not come to us? Well, hopefully they did come to you, but if they didn't, it's because they had an actual need and then they went and found something, which that's something for another episode. We actually may have an episode later on that, but the reality is there was a need there and what you
Mhm.
provided. Now, should they have asked you? Yes, but what you provided wasn't meeting that need. And we've had this happen. Something I found as I was looking at the research, I thought was a pretty interesting statistic. 34% of employees use unapproved apps and tools. This was from One Password's State of Enterprise Security. And it follows right along with that is there are people out there using tools that we are not aware of or were asked about. Um, and it's because they have a need. For us, it was Google Chrome saved passwords. We started seeing people saving their passwords in Chrome and autofilling them everywhere. And I guess that's at least if they had a different password every time, then it's still not ideal, but at least there'd be some way to use a different password. But in reality, it wasn't that. It was just more convenience kind of a thing, and
Mhm.
there was no tool for them to, have a suggested password or for a tool to actually help them create a stronger password.
Yeah, and that's what we had users before we did away with Chrome. They would have their passwords in Chrome, and there's definitely the convenience. But with modern password managers, with the browser plugins, they make it just as easy. So I'm definitely looking forward to us having a solution across the board. The other thing that kind of sticks out is, and we should have known, I should have put two and two together, but like when we do the end user training, I don't do it every year, but often we'll go to have it been pwned and basically enter someone's email address, and it'll show like if they've had LinkedIn. Matter of fact, LinkedIn's been hacked several times, but it'll show anytime that their credentials or information has been part of a breach. And if people are using their work email addresses for a lot of logins, you're going to find that very frequent. So we we talk about this stuff and not providing a tool. I really take ownership on that. And anyways, we're looking forward to getting that solution out there. Just I definitely feel guilty. I feel like it's my responsibility that people are reusing their passwords at our organization.
Yeah, I've had those thoughts as well. There's a huge benefit to using some sort of enterprise password manager, and I think that's kind of one of the things we wanted to transition to now is talking about some of those benefits. And for me, I mean, I think it's pretty basic, but it's you being able to generate passwords that are more secure. You mentioned your executive there telling you there's no way I can remember all these passwords. and that's true, but there's definitely no way to remember all those passwords if they're all like 40 characters long, and a password manager really gives you that kind of ability.
So moving into password managers and why we should do them, I don't think really most of us have a basic idea, but I figured we would just kind of go into detail of all the benefits, just to make sure everyone's aware. One, it's so much easier. They basically come with password generators. Every tool that I've used comes with its own password generator. So you can create unique passwords and passphrases for each website easily. It's hard, honestly, it's hard to come up with a password that you can remember not doing that. So that helps out. You're able to share passwords with different groups or different parts of your organization, and then also it can help people with MFA. The one that we're looking at right now to rolling out to our organization, it actually has the MFA built in, so you can actually do the QR code and all that stuff within it.
Yeah, let me kind of have a comment on that one as well. That's something that we've used, especially in group settings. And I would say this is not something that we would encourage per se, but for some websites, especially if you have like an IT staff that's managing that website, you don't have more than one login. You have one login, and there's no way to create extra logins. And so it's nice to be able to actually share that MFA token because otherwise you're setting it up for like one phone or something like that, and then you need to log in and you have to like find the other person, they're on vacation. So my caveat would be only places where you can't set up multiple logins and multiple MFAs, and anything that's not as critical. I wouldn't use a password manager as your MFA if it's like the most critical account that you need to log into. But if it's a less critical account, I think it's probably something that's okay.
I'm having a moment where you just enlightened me. So I didn't really get where you're going with that, but now I get it. So we have one login where it's kind of uh, it's a for people doing presentations. It's a login for that, and it's so it doesn't have the timeout because all the users have a timeout and they're screen locked. So we had a couple people where we anyways, when it comes to the two factor, we got to hunt each other down. So that's a great idea, especially since the tool we're looking at, you can share that MFA, so that'll help us out. So that's actually a good idea, Tanner. I've never even thought about that.
Yeah, we've used it quite a bit. Only like I said, in those caveated situations. There was one where we did use it initially, and then we found out that we could actually create multiple users, multiple accounts, and each one could be separately MFA'd. That's obviously ideal on that. Something that we've really kind of leaned into as we've started to roll out enterprise password management is the nice thing about centralized control. Now, some people, some of the employees, they may or may not agree with this, but as a staff that's trying to manage the coming in of employees, the offboarding of employees, retirements, things like that, it is nice to have access to be able to like attach someone's vault to someone else. Should they leave the company or potentially get terminated or any other reason, maybe just get sick and be out of the office. It's nice to be able to do that. And one thing that we also have noticed, at least with the one we're using, is the ability to you can use it. We don't use it as much for this, but using it for local apps, so non-web apps. If you have like a particular client they're using in your environment that needs a credential set, you can use it to autofill that as well.
Another thing that we've ran into, and we struggled with this when we were creating our password policy, but when our department, we were working on the password policy that we implemented. I said, whatever we put in here, we have to abide by. So don't put anything in there. So we were a little laxed on how you can share a password with someone. Obviously, we want to do it via an encrypted manner, but the password manager tool that we're looking at, Keeper, it allows you to send a password. So you can send a password to a user and not even know what that password is. So that really, once we get this implemented, we'll probably look at changing up the password policy and not send it any other method.
Yeah, that is really handy, especially if you have like a vendor or some sort of maybe you have a remote employee. I mean, there's all kinds of things where you might need to potentially share something. I know we can do that as well in the tool that we're using, and you can also limit like how many times it can be clicked on and how long it's valid. It's only good for 2 hours or something like that. So that's really handy. Some of the things you may not think about as a benefit of these enterprise password managers is that they potentially can help lower your cybersecurity insurance costs. So, Anthony, I don't know if you would agree with me, but cybersecurity insurance has become harder to renew every single year that I've been part of that renewal process. The
Yeah.
questionnaires get longer, they get more strenuous, they have more things as part of them. And these are kind of things that are starting to get asked. Do you use password managers? Do you use MFA? Do you have EDR tools on your desktops and things like that? And so, as this continues to grow, I definitely foresee a time whenever they're asking about this, and you either potentially may not either get renewed or you may get renewed at a much higher price.
Yeah.
That's something I think could potentially happen.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that with the insurance. Matter of fact, the max coverage amount has went down for us along with the price increase. But yeah, I would definitely the questionnaires get longer each year. And we haven't seen anything with password managers, but I'm sure that's just right down the road.
Yeah, it seems like whatever we're working on now, they put on that sheet about 2 or 3 years after that. So definitely not something you want to get behind on. Compliance requirements. We don't have robust compliance requirements that we have to do, but if you do, maybe you're in a medical field and HIPAA's really, really big for you, it helps you meet compliance as well, which is nice. So I thought we'd kind of move a little bit into our next section about talking about like which password manager is right for you, and maybe I even titled that incorrectly, but like some of the pros and cons of the different options that are out there. One of the things that you have to think about when you're looking at password managers is whether you want an open source product or whether you want a closed source product. And there are pros and cons to both, just like there always is. But on the open source side, the nice thing about that is you can, if you want to, if you're technical and you're savvy enough, you can look at that source code and see how they implement the security of that product. It's available for review by everyone. There are other security researchers that are also looking at it, and they can improve on it. They can suggest things that potentially could be vulnerabilities so that the company can fix it. Sometimes with open source things, it's easier to migrate between two different products because they're not necessarily trying to lock you in to a particular thing. There's on the open source side, I think there are more free versions. I'm not saying there's none on the closed source side, but there's just more open source tends to kind of lean that way. On the closed source side, though, doesn't necessarily mean that it's less secure. I'm a big proponent of the kind of mantra that a secure system is a secure system. Doesn't matter how you implement it or where it's implemented, but it's not something you can verify yourself. You can't look at that code. There's not the security community can't dissect things and try to figure out that. Doesn't mean that it's not secure. Just means that you're gonna have to put a little more trust in the company itself to provide that security. But on the flip side of that, typically these products are well supported. They're not a open source product that you're having to put a lot of work into yourself. These are typically paid software, and they typically have robust support behind them. So if you have any issues or you need any type of help, that's something that you can get as part of those.
Yeah, there's definitely nothing wrong though. If you don't have a budget, like there's nothing wrong with using one of the open source ones. I think Tanner, both of us have used KeyPass in the past, and we used it at work for several years before moving on. And it was just we started using it, and we needed just a little bit more functionality, or we wanted a little more functionality, and that's when we decided to move over off of it. But there's definitely nothing wrong with a lot of the open source ones, and I definitely think some of the closed source ones are just as secure. But just reflecting back, I believe the ones that have had security incidents have mostly been closed source items. So I definitely don't think there's anything wrong or insecure about the open source ones, like you mentioned, them being reviewed so often by so many people.
Yeah, on the KeyPass side of things, one thing that when I used it a lot, at least initially, one thing that I really really liked is you can actually run it off a USB drive. So if you want to basically have your password vault on a USB drive that's offline, if you think about it that
Yeah.
way, if privacy is a strict concern, or maybe there's like a parent or someone else you're kind of looking after and you want to be able to kind of have their passwords with you, but you don't want it like plugged in the computer or available on the cloud all the time. Or maybe you just have like two or three what you consider like your ultimate most private accounts. And that's something you can put in KeyPass and then put something physically away from everything else. So at that point, there's almost no way it can be compromised unless someone physically breaks into your house. So there's that ability as well. Then you talked about Keeper a little bit. Tell us a little bit more about how that's one of the options we were kind of making a list of the ones we had used or had evaluated. What kind of led you guys down that road, and why was it something out of the other options that you selected?
Yeah, so we're currently using Bitwarden, and I will say this: I do think overall that our setup with Bitwarden is more secure. But it was actually I went and visited a neighbor co-op, and they were talking about Keeper, and I kind of have a chest out. I was like, "We're using Bitwarden; it's the most secure." And I had to, anyways. I was just like, "Bitwarden's the bomb. We're not going to switch." But we were looking at. I talked to them. We're looking at doing stuff for our users, and I was like, "Well, let's Bitwarden. It, it works very well, but the interface it's not as nice as some of the other interfaces." And I was like, "Well, let me check out Keeper." Our MSP, they resell both Bitwarden and Keeper, and so we spoke with them about it, just to kind of get their thoughts. We're like, "Yeah, it's a great solution," and they admitted they're like, "It has a better interface than Bitwarden." So we rolled out Keeper to start testing it and looking at it. Anything we're going to route to users, we're going to test thoroughly. And as we got to testing it and looking at it, it had a lot of features that we really like. One thing is it we can push it to our seam, so we can actually see if someone's using a compromised account. That was another thing. It searches the dark web and it's looking to see if you're using credentials that are part of a breach. It also looks to see if you're using a weak password or if you're reusing passwords, and basically it'll have a score for each user. If you're using the same password across 50 logins, you're going to have a horrible rating from Keeper. It has the passkey functionality, which I think you're going to talk about in a little bit. It has auto login, so you can when you go to a page, it won't just fill it; it'll actually fill it out and log in for you. Even you can even have it do the self destruct. I don't know how many folks out there remember Inspector Gadget with the secret message that exploded. Not quite that method, but it'll wipe all the passwords. Like you can set it up where if someone puts in the wrong login 5 times, it can it has a destruct method and wipe that. You'd have to be awful brave or have a backup to do that, but that's something that's out there if you wanted it.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. And kind of while we're on the subject, you brought it up, but that was probably my favorite show as a child to watch. Was Inspector Gadget. Love that thing. We are actually doing Bitwarden. We're implementing Bitwarden, and I totally agree with all your points there. It's definitely not as easy to use as some of the other options I have personally used. I think obviously you kind of made the points about why, or like the pros. It's open source. It's highly, I'm trying to think, highly it's exalted, I guess, in the security community. Everybody really praises it because of that and the vast security, at least in their mind, the vast security strides that allows them to achieve. But, the UI, not quite there yet. I'm hoping over time the UI does kind of improve itself. And as you mentioned, there's a few kind of like, I would say, around the edge features that don't exist there. One nice thing about Bitwarden that I don't think, other than KeyPass, of course, is you can host it yourself, which is really nice. So if you wanted to have that like in your own environment, not in the cloud, then Bitwarden is really one of the only options other than KeyPass. One password I've used quite a bit. I've used RoboForm in the past. It's an older one. It was actually maybe one of the first password managers other than KeyPass, but their UI, they haven't really updated it a lot. It's another one of those closed source ones. I think they're just better options. You already talked about Keeper and some of the other options, but it is out there. I have used it. One password, like I said. One I wouldn't consider, and I don't know, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, but LastPass was like kind of the hot new thing for a while, and man, they just got crushed over and over by compromises. I would definitely not recommend them. I don't know, Anthony, what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, fortunately for me, when we were looking for our department, LastPass was out there and a lot of people were talking about it. And I honestly tested it out and I preferred KeyPass. Like that was really the main reason that we weren't on it because that was really everyone was seemed like they were recommending that. But yeah, they after the two incidents that they've had, I don't know. that would be one I'd have a hard time recommending. I mean, they're still in business, so I'm sure they've remedied those things, but just one from a user's perspective, when I used it, I honestly didn't care for it a whole lot. So
Yeah, I haven't used that one personally, so I was using other options, but yeah, after hearing about the security incidents, now I do have a theory. I don't know if it's as a sound theory or not, but that the best time to use someone's product is right after they have a security incident because they have probably went through everything with as fine tooth comb as you can go through it. And but at the same time, yeah, you got to build up that trust over time. I would say no matter which option you pick, we are implementing MFA. I think I imagine you are, Anthony, as well, with all the vaults. So make sure your product can support MFA. If you're going to spread it around on the enterprise, if it's just going to be something you use personally, then of course, you make that on your own call there. It should support hardware keys. We're not doing that per se right now, but it should have the ability to support hardware keys, UB keys, or anything else. You can make really a hardware key out of anything. Um, so those are the 2 things that I would definitely make sure whichever option you choose. Hopefully, we gave you a few ideas for ones if you're not really familiar with the password manager scene. I thought, Anthony, like, we're both kind of just starting this, and one thing I thought we could do is maybe if there was any tips, like, we're just starting to implement this, I think you guys are as well. Is there anything that you've ran into as you kind of started to roll this out that you're like, "Man, if someone else is getting ready to roll this out, they should know this?"
really, the things that come to mind is you want to make it usable for your users. If you've got it so locked down and so difficult, your folks are just going to reuse the same password. So I would keep that in mind. Yes, you want to do it secure, and yet, yeah, we're doing two factor with it. Uh, but I'm just thinking, and we're still trying to work through this, but we're trying to find a good balance. We've got a little bit more security for the IT stuff. Any admin credentials, it's going to be a little more difficult to get in. But for your users, I mean, that's just really the name of game security. You've got to find a good balance. The most secure thing will be something that no one can get into, but you want to make sure that you're not overcomplicating it for your users because they're going to do the easy method and they're just going to reuse the same password over and over again. So think about that when you're making the settings. But I would definitely require MFA. Now, the frequency and all that's up for debate. But I definitely think it would be a requirement.
Yeah, and something you can consider, I didn't really mention this before, is potentially SSO. Um, so we are for our users, that's actually how we're gonna go about it. Obviously, there still is a master password, of course, but we're gonna provided they go through this SSO process and do an MFA, that they won't have to enter their actual password. We're hoping that it could be a little bit easier, still maintain a better level of security than just passwords. And for a user where their credentials, this would be like a kind of a general user, I would say. Now, you have certain users, maybe your finance users, HR, things like that, where you might not want to do that. But for the average person, you got a marketing person, that may be something you can compromise on and make it a little easier, as kind of Anthony mentioned. Some of the tips I would give, I would start with like a smaller group. Always start with kind of a pilot group, and the pilot group needs to be users that are very, very understanding because you really need to get your process nailed down before you roll this out to everyone. To be sure it's as seamless as possible. Have really, really good training material. In fact, have someone else review your training material. I think as IT people, we think we do a really good job with training material, but whenever I've had it reviewed, sometimes uh, people find things that maybe we need to add, or maybe something that we didn't include, or something we need to remove. So definitely do that. I talked about kind of that pilot group. Make sure you're hand holding them. I mean, you need to be up there like every day checking on them for the first like week or so, just to be sure. Like, hey, is everything okay? Is it all working as expected? That kind of thing. And then we typically do this. I don't know if you how you guys do this, Anthony, but if it's a project, unless it's just something that the company already uses and it's like an update to it, we always roll out department by department, and we kind of do a stagger with a few weeks in between, just so I'm honestly maybe for us, so that we're not having like 100 support tickets come in on a Monday.
Actually, Tanner, I'm gonna ask you to elaborate on that.
So when we roll out, if we're rolling out a new product, like in this case a password manager, we're gonna do that department by department. So we're gonna start with
Okay.
accounting, and we're gonna say, okay, you guys get Bitwarden. Here's how to set it up. We'll be here on Tuesday morning. We'll be right here. We're not even going to be down in our area. We're going to be actually right beside your desk. We're going to help you. We're going to be checking in for the next week or two. And once we get past that, then we move on to the next group. And maybe there's another 10, 15 users in that department. And we just kind of we do those in blocks so that we don't overwhelm ourselves. Also, so we feel like we can give like really like over the top service for people, especially when it's something new. If it's an update, like we already have this password manager and there's a new version, then yeah, we're probably just going to push that out to everybody, provided that new version is not completely different than the old version. Then we would go ahead and just roll that out company wide.
So we haven't rolled it out across the company, but we have started with our engineering department. Just for us, they were the ones that were the first ones to ask for something like this, especially after we rolled out our password policy and they're trying to abide by it. But also, and everyone will have to weigh this on their own organization. But for us, our engineering department, they're the most technical, and they probably had the most passwords outside of our department. And they're great at giving feedback. Just where we've got a good relationship, they'll be sure to complain. So we rolled it out to them, and honestly, it went pretty smooth. But those are definitely some good tips with the training, because I don't know that our training went so well. We'll have to fine tune that when we roll it out to further.
Yeah, if you have we have a training development person, the at our co-op that we use. Highly recommend tapping into that if you have it, or any depending on whatever organization you have someone that's kind of over that. Work with them collaboratively on that. Or if you don't, like I think a good person to kind of run things by are marketing folks. They're typically pushing out things to the public. And so they kind of have that eye on like what is understandable, what isn't understandable. So there's a couple options I think of. You kind of mentioned you dropped earlier. So we're going to talk about passkeys a little bit here before we wrap up. Passkeys is kind of this new thing. Well, I wouldn't call it a new thing, but it's becoming more popular. You talked about setting one up here recently on a particular service you used. So, what is a passkey for those that might be listening and not aware? It's basically trying to remove the idea of passwords, right? So, instead of using a password or in lieu of a password, you're going to be using cryptographic keys, a private key, and a public key. Private key is gonna be on the device that you're using, and the public key is gonna be sent to the service that you're using. So, let's say it's Facebook. I'm gonna create a private key, it's gonna be on my iPhone. Um, Facebook is gonna have that public key, I'm gonna send that to them, and then basically whenever I try to log in, they're gonna prompt me with a challenge. I'm going to kinda sign it with my private key, and they're gonna verify that that signature is legitimate with the public key. Once they do, they're gonna know that that's me, that I have that actual key, and I'm in possession of that device, and they're gonna let me in. So this is a way to kinda bypass that password, methodology. Becoming more popular, a little curious about how that's gonna be implemented through there's a lot of legacy sites, there's a lot of legacy applications. They're still using that username and password. So we're gonna kinda see, but that is looming out there. So provided if you can do that with your password manager, I think that's a good thing as well. So look into that. If your password manager can become that private key or store those private keys, that would be something I would look into as well. Anthony, are there any kind of final thoughts? I think enterprise password managers are pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I guess just looking at it from our perspective, I would hope every, like, especially with the small and medium businesses, that every IT department is already using a password manager of some sorts. Because honestly, there's no way to do what you're supposed to be doing without one. I know I've heard some people where you got the keys of the kingdom if you're using a password manager, but you can harden that, you can secure that. If you're super paranoid, do one of those solutions where you can do self-hosted to where it can't be reached from the outside world. You can do that, and then or you can make it public, accessible from the outside world, but you can have your firewall in place and geo block and add all kinds of other measures and tools. So I think there's a solution out there if you look, but I would say don't. There's no reason to not do this. There's all these great open source tools that are available. Definitely start with the IT department, test it, vet it, and then you can start looking at the other users at your organization. But with that said, I think at this day and age, there's so many logins. Of course, internally, a lot of organizations are doing single sign on, but you've got all these other things like marketing. They're logging into all these different social media sites and stuff like that. If we're preaching, we're teaching that don't reuse your password, If you expect people to do that, you need to give them a password manager.
100% agree with that. I would say just to kind of follow up on the you kind of mentioned marketing, but I would say kind of a sleeper pick to go with your engineering group of people that have a lot of credentials and you don't think about it. That's accounting. Ton of credentials, and all their credentials are really critical. It's banking information, it's the ability to reverse transactions, initiate transactions, do drafts, all those kinds of things. And I would say the limits on those accounts are large. You're able to potentially send or receive money into the millions of dollars potentially. So there were ones that I would actually recommend using as well. And what we did as part of our little pilot group is we actually picked a test user in every single department. Instead of just starting with a pilot department, we picked like real savvy user in every department, and we felt like they could be kind of our champion. So that's kind of, I guess, our strategy there. All right. So, Anthony, another episode to the listeners. If you aren't subscribed, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're found on almost all the podcast platforms that I know about. I think Anthony's added us to a couple more. If there is one out there that we're not aware of, please shoot us an email and we'll be happy to add it to that as well. If you have any episode ideas or feedback, make your voice heard. We'd be happy to have an email at showitoffthewirepodcast.com. Send us an email. What do you want to hear about next? Or contact us on any of our social media channels, LinkedIn, X, YouTube, Facebook. If you enjoyed the podcast, please share it with someone. We want to kind of grow the podcast, and we know that this is useful information, especially for those small, medium businesses where you always feel like there's something you're kind of not doing. So definitely share it with a coworker or a colleague. We publish every other Monday morning, and we also have been doing some bonus episodes. If you have any feedback on that, reach out to us. When something comes up, either some sort of critical news or maybe we have an interview opportunity, things like that, we've done some bonus episodes on the off week. Any other thoughts, Anthony?
Nope, just appreciate everyone that participated in our giveaway. We had 3 happy people with winning a prize. And anyways, I'll wish my finance department that entered that drawing better luck next time.
So thanks for tuning in, everyone, to another episode of Off the Wire. We are grateful to have you here, and we look forward to the next episode.
Thank you, everyone.